open up with pledge allegiance by Councilman Chaves and an opening prayer by Councilman Sands.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heavenly Father, we are thankful that we can gather here this evening. Help us to act prudently and wisely as we do the city business. We're thankful for our residents. We're thankful for the city officers and staff. We're thankful for the council and mayor. I ask that you would give us wisdom and insight, and that you would just bless us all here in Tokerville. And we are thankful, and we lift up these prayers in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Todd. Oh, yes. Anybody else have an opening statement? Or any other prayer they'd like to bring forward? All right, we're going to move to the agenda. Approval of the agenda order for this evening.
Mayor, I make a motion to approve the order of the agenda.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
All right.
Disclosure and declarations of conflict from anyone on the council. Mayor, I have none.
None.
Great. We're going to move on. Consent agenda, review and possible approval of meeting minutes from March 5th, 2025, city council meeting, and review and possible approval of city expenditures from February 2025.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve we got to do them separate, correct?
Now we're going to be.
I'll make a motion to approve the entire consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, abstain. I wasn't here.
Okay. All right, we are going to move into our public forum. Anyone from the public can get up and complain about anything that's not on the agenda.
Or say nice things.
Or talk to you.
Or say nice things. Absolutely. Bring up anything that's not on the agenda. That'd be great to hear. Not just complaints. We like all forms of communication. All right, we're going to close the public. You want to say something? Come on up.
Is this the copy of the agenda? Yeah, do you have one which
We do, somewhere. Yeah, there you go. Everybody's got it. All right. We are going to close our public forum and go into a public hearing. I need a motion to move into a public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are in a public hearing. Public input is sought on Tocqueville City's annexation policy plan required by Utah Code 10-2-401.5, which serves as a roadmap for informed annexation decisions, promoting strategic growth, property rights protection, and collaboration with neighboring communities. Who's going to run through this for us? Emily or Darren?
This is basically
The public hearing.
This is a public
This is
hearing, right?
not really for us to talk.
That's right. That's for people. That's right. Yep.
Close it and then we'll talk about it, I guess.
Yeah. So anybody from the public like to talk about our annexation policy?
So it's item number 1 on your business.
It is. I saw
It
that.
is,
Just,
you know.
yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, we've heard from the public. We would now like a motion to close our public hearing.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, public hearing is closed. We are going to move on to item F1, discuss the possible action on Tocqueville City annexation policy plan. All right, now who?
I'll take it.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect.
So this is the policy plan that was drafted by Sunrise actually last year. And we had to take our last policy out of code, which was from 2014. We did that in August, I believe. And then it's gone through 2 public hearings at Planning Commission with the opportunity for affected entities, the counties, the other municipalities around us, and special service districts to comment. We haven't had any comments on that, so it's before you for possible adoption tonight. This is required by state code, so they drafted it just to have all of the requirements in there and make sure we were compliant. The main elements in there would be the expansion area map, which shows potential annexation area around us. Criteria that would guide you and the Planning Commission on knowing whether or not to accept an annexation petition. And then it also guides landowners on the process, which is mandated by state code to submit a petition and how you make that decision. So I think we'll show you, first of all, how to see that map. Just kind of walk you through it. If to get to this map, you go to our website, and then under the Planning and Zoning Department, we have our zoning map. And within the zoning map is a layer. So that's up here in this corner. And you apply the annexation layer. There's also one for the general plan on here. And then the other municipalities, you can turn any of those on or off. So you'll see that one added this overlay here. And that is the area that they determined was potential for annexation. We don't have to annex all that area, but it is contiguous to us. It's not incorporated by anyone else.
Well, that is the annexation area.
And so it's, any of those areas could potentially make an application or a petition to annex into Tokerville. So
So scroll down, there is some south along this side of the river.
there's a little bit south, yeah.
Between Hurricane and,
Hurricane and Tokerville, yeah.
A little bit of it overlaps with Leeds annexation map, right about here.
Yeah.
So Leeds ends here, and then their annexation map kind of spreads up to this area, and so does ours. So they could go into either one. So I don't know if you have any questions about the criteria or on the plan itself.
those overlaps are pretty common.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, something like that area there, it might be better to go to Leeds, it might be better to go to Tokerville, and you discuss, and that's why.
And I haven't reviewed Hurricanes that they might be overlapping us there.
On the other north side of the river?
Yeah,
That's a-
they might. I don't know if they are or not.
Yeah, that's a pretty big
Jump.
barrier for them to cross over.
I don't think so. Sunrise did call it out in the plan specifically that it does overlap with Leeds, and they didn't say that we
Didn't.
overlap with any.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Okay.
So
Question?
do we have any activity going on right now with respect to annexation?
None.
No.
None. No request.
I noticed that on page 2, it says one of the motives is to impede our neighboring municipalities from accessing that land that we might want in the future. So I didn't know if we were trying to jump on it or not. That's on page 2, so I just was kind of
Nothing-
curious.
No one's come to us, and we're not proactively seeking out
Yeah.
annexation.
We don't usually go out and say, hey, please come annex into Tokerville. It's usually, this is a tool that gives them a process
Procedure.
and procedure to come into Tokerville that's in line with state code.
Just for the sake of the public, on YouTube possibly, it does cover the fact that existing residents will not be subject to tax increases with this. It's part of the plan. And also part of the plan includes making sure the infrastructure is not incurred by the current residents as well. So just if anyone starts worrying about growing outside into that annex area, that they don't have to worry about them having to pay for it, so to speak.
Right, and that comes down to development pays for development.
Right.
If somebody's gonna wanna annex into Tokerville and they wanna build a development, they pay for development.
Right.
So it's kind of our standard.
Will everybody please read page 3, number 2, and tell me how that interpretates from what you just said?
Item number 3.
Page 2.
2, right there.
Oh,
Right there.
oh,
I can
what
give
what
you
is,
mine.
what are you getting?
Is that Tokerville City have the
Yes.
capacity to install and provide services to these places you annex? Because down further, it puts the burden on the developer, but right here, to me, it puts the burden on us a little bit. So you got,
I think maybe some verbiage could change there, because I don't think the intent was to have the city pay for the infrastructure to be placed there, but it does, in my mind, Tokerville City, or what does it say there again? The municipal services provide required municipal services. We would definitely provide it after the infrastructure is put in, of course.
Yes, I don't know if that.
And so that would be,
That's what stands out. I don't know if that reads correctly or not.
So
We
if
don't
you're
have
looking at, are you looking at paragraph 3 on page 3? Is that what we're looking at?
it's number
Paragraph
two,
two.
number
Okay.
2.
So I'll just expand upon this a little bit to give some context. So within the statute, there's like required subheadings that are supposed to be in your annexation policy plan. So that's what this is ponying off of. As far as how it reads, we can change the language, massage it a little, whatever we want to do there.
Well, why do we want that language in there that might obligate us to provide them the facilities?
Yeah, it's a
I
good
think
point.
that's what that says. And it could read both ways. I mean,
It shows that we
It's a good point. I
favor
think it's
annexation.
ambiguous.
What if you just remove install and then you would just have provide municipal services? Because that's what we do is provide
Right.
we
municipal
want to provide
services.
after they build.
Exactly.
the infrastructure.
So all you got to do is remove them 2 words and it cleans up the whole,
Do we have to start all over to do that, or we can?
No.
that's a minor change.
Yeah, it's Sunrise Engineering that drafted it. So I'm sure we just reach out to them and ask them to just strike those 2 words. It'd be pretty simple.
Can we just change it?
Yeah.
Here,
Okay.
and we could, that's a small enough change tonight that we wouldn't have to go back to any public hearing.
No, yeah. The state code says we can adopt it tonight with or without the modifications that you suggest.
Perfect. Perfect.
All right, let's go back to that, Emily, if you, yeah. So the city favors annexation of development in undeveloped areas, the need, capacity, right there, capacity to install and provide. Let's get rid of install. The need to
provide
provide
services, yeah.
municipal, so get rid of install and, as Joey said, those 2 words, provide municipal services, or where there are plans for future development that will create the need for capacity to provide required municipal services.
Just take out
Install and.
2 words.
the need for, or the need to provide required, so you take 4 in capacity, the need.
Well, there's got to be a demand for the city,
Right.
so that's the purpose I think I read there is that there is a need and a
Yeah.
desire for it to be under the municipal, services.
So do we have, so what if we don't have the capacity to provide? We don't annex it if we don't have that capacity. So that's one of those.
Or they have to provide the capacity.
Right. So that's,
Let's say
that
there's
kind
a-
of helps protect us.
Yeah.
If we don't have the capacity,
Right.
then that is got to be part of the negotiation on us annexing something in.
Either way, I think we're all right, but we can absolutely take those 2
Yeah.
words out with the motion.
That's a good catch, man.
So when you talk about infrastructure, that could be everything from a water tank to pipelines to roadways to everything.
Yeah.
All
Drainage,
That the developer,
the developer,
Storm.
exactly.
they want to be tied to that. Absolutely.
Yeah, development pays for development.
And it says it further on down the line.
It
So I
does.
can understand why that's in there, but
It's better.
I'd like to see that.
Those-
Some of it's on, so it's more,
How we get, what do you think of that, Wayne? We get rid of install and, so the capacity
Those
to
2 words
provide
come out.
municipal services. So we're not gonna install. So, that's just,
scratch it.
yep. All right, is there any other concerns in this plan?
I didn't see, that was the only thing that jumped out at me.
Ready for a motion?
I am.
I move that we go ahead and approve the annexation plan and modify page
Page
3, item number 2, to take out the words to install,
Install and.
install it, those 2 words.
install and.
Yes.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this? I'd like a roll call vote on your end, Chuck. Good.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. All right, item F2, discuss the possible action on resolution 2025, adopting the subdivision submittal policy. So this is a new policy for subdivisions because of a state statute that changed. So this is the policy to get that done.
Yeah, we have to publish a checklist for them so they know what constitutes a complete application. We used to have most of these on our applications, so now they're just consolidated into a policy, but it is split up by each different type of application. So there's the concept plan, preliminary plat, final plat, simple subdivision, and then the construction drawings are on here as well. Darren and I went through these, everything that was on our applications, anything we thought was missing, we added, we compared it with other cities, and then Bruce and Kayla reviewed it and added a few things as well. So this is the complete checklist.
Some of these might change too as you start using it and working through the process.
Yeah,
You'll
that's the
find-
nice thing.
Yeah.
It's a policy,
Yeah.
it's not a,
It's a lot easier.
yeah, it's not an ordinance, it makes it
Everything I saw looked like it really made sense to me, so.
perfect.
So I need to play dumb for a minute. And,
Just for a minute?
well,
Sorry, I should have said that.
I'm looking at this as a outsider or, somebody that isn't involved in this on a daily basis. And I think we have like 10 pages. And I'm wondering to myself, are these all separate pages, or if somebody's just coming in for something small, do you just give them the short plan that's on page 12?
It's both. So if you do, didn't we do one for a simple subdivision?
Yeah, you did one.
So there's a different process for simple subdivision. We actually did that down, but
Right.
it's still got to meet state code, and we have to require those things. Now,
Well,
so it depends. And this is just a subdivision for single family homes and two family homes or whatever that, multiple family.
I think you're only going to fill out the paperwork that's defined.
for that,
your
that's what I'm
application.
saying.
Yeah, you're not going to fill out
So
for a
this
big one.
this is in essence a concept plan, then there's a preliminary plat, and then
Right.
there's a final plat, and then there's a subdivision. Now, is there a sign off on each and every one of these if somebody just using one portion of it?
So
So this is just a checklist. There's a
This is a
separate
Because I
application. This is
noticed
just
there
for
was
their
a sign-off
reference.
button
It's like a,
on the
it's a
last
cheat
page.
Just for the policy,
yeah,
just to
it's-
pass the policy.
Yeah, like Joey said,
So like if you came in and you want to do a simple subdivision, they're going to hand you this and you're going to say, oh, I need this. Instead of you going and doing your research on the code, this is a cheat sheet for an applicant to come in and basically, it really is. We've done the homework for them. These are the minimum requirements you must turn in to make a formal application.
And so then the other thing, if I'm doing the preliminary and there's a question on the preliminary, why would that question be asked again on the final?
Because there's a preliminary, so it's like at the beginning in a preliminary, just for instance, you could have a preliminary drainage report, and then at final, you will want to have the finalized drainage report.
All right, but you're asking the same question twice. and I'm
Yeah,
wondering-
you have to. It's kind of like our professional services agreement. For the application of the preliminary plat. And then we do it again at final plat, because as you make a different application, there's a whole new process.
Some of the stuff on
So
preliminary.
even
plat
though
might
you've
change.
completed the preliminary and you've got to check on every single item, you've got to repeat and check again on every single item,
Yes.
on the duplicate questions that you have.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it'll be a new plat that
it's a
you're
new
turning in.
application, and yeah, because there are things different in a preliminary plat. There are things that are completely different than a final plat. A final plat has, I don't know, if you'd like to come and see the difference between a preliminary plat map and a final plat map, I could show you. They might seem kind of the same, and yes, they are. So like a vicinity map and an arrow, a north arrow, yeah, that's the same.
So you have one sentence and a word in the sentence includes fences, okay? And then you have another sentence that includes the word fence, but the sentence is totally different. One's on the preliminary and one's on the final. And it just, to me, I'm like, I've already checked the fact that I had a fence here, and now I'm checking it again, except it has, the sentence is revised differently and includes fences. And it just looked like it was difficult for me to
Most of the.
see the simplicity of this.
Most of the criteria is already met at preliminary. And so when they come to do final, they like, especially in drainage or something, like they may have had to move the drainage and they would provide an as-built plan. So that would be a portion of the final plat with the actual survey of where all the stuff is located. So even though like on preliminary, they came in and said the fence is going to be here and it meets the criteria, then they're basically saying on final, yes, it is 100% as we said in preliminary. So it's not that much more work for somebody. It's just,
It's already a layer that's there.
yeah, it's just reconfirming that layer for the final.
And the reports, you're just reconfirming the
Yeah.
reports as well? Okay. just-
Yeah, like with the title report, things could change significantly.
Yeah.
You'd want to verify that sort of thing.
Okay. I just was reading the same thing over and over and over.
Well, because
again.
we sometimes too, between preliminary plat approval and final plat, it could be months, it could be 6 months process, depending on their engineer, their being able to get those studies they need, the different things. So it could be financial. Maybe they're not having, they don't have the finances to finish. Because at final plat now, we used to go preliminary plat, construction plans and reports and such, and then final plat. And now we go final plat and construction drawings and all the reports, everything all has to be together as per state code, and it was mandated that way.
Okay.
I like it because I think it makes it easier for them to.
Yeah.
We were trying to make it as simple as possible, but,
But basically, anything with government is not simple. I mean,
Well-
we don't go that way. I hate to say that, but subdivisions are something, you
I
think
would-
it's gonna be super easy, but it's not. It just,
yeah, I would say that most engineers and developers that do this on a daily basis or a weekly, monthly basis, this is what they're used to doing in St. George. We derived some of this from other cities as well, as well as sitting down and going
All
through.
right. I take
The
off my
other
dumb hat now.
portion,
No, that's okay. That's okay because, for somebody, let's say, that's doing a simple subdivision, those are going to be typically your people that don't do this every day. They just want to they've got a single lot that they want to split in half. Or they want up to three lots on it. They just don't understand the process. But that's why we're here to help them.
I kind of looked at it as if it was one packet since it was a signature line on the last page. And I thought,
So Gary, here's what the simple subdivision application looks like. This is what they actually turn into us. And they'll turn in one printed plat here. And we just reference the policy here that says that the plat has to comply with the policy. So they're not answering all those questions on there. It's just a checklist for them to reference to make sure that their plat is complete. That's not in your packet. I just pulled it up to give you an example.
so this is the whole page, so check
Yeah,
this.
It's just the checklist, yeah, but this is the actual
if you have everything on
application.
there checked off, then you can pass.
There's not a signature on that, is there?
No.
There is one on the,
probably our signature
Yeah,
adopted
looks
as
like-
policy.
Well, the
Yeah, there
policy
is one
itself
on-
will be
there is one on
signed.
the
That's
simple
the
subdivision.
policy. That's
Yeah.
for us to, once we adopt the policy.
As a whole.
Yeah, they won't have that. That's not the applicant's signature. That's you guys approving this.
Okay.
This will be a document that the applicant references. See the
Right.
checklist. Yeah.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay, he's got his smart hat back on.
No, it's 'cause-
Okay,
Do we like
any other
it?
questions about our policy on subdivision?
I have none.
All right. I see a motion.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the subdivision submittal policy 2025-.01.
I have a motion.
This is item F.
I have a second. Any further discussion on this item? All in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion carried. Beautiful. All right, item F3, discussion of the fiscal year 2025, 2026 administrative budget. Ben, you're up.
Yep, this is kind of the next stage in the budget process. So really, every meeting from now till the probably beginning of June, we're going to have a budget discussion. So this is just the next step in the process. This phase of the budget. So now that we've done the strategic planning portion of our budgeting for the next year, The budget is actually the dollars and cents of the budget. Kind of traditional budgeting is what we're talking about tonight. And again, I could probably just close this presentation by saying, in the meeting packet is the budget. It presents an admin balanced budget, but I'm not going to let you off that easy. So this is just getting this admin budget in front of the council. That's the primary purpose. You'll have about a month and a half to review it, make suggestions, because ultimately this is not, you don't adopt an admin budget, you adopt the council's budget for the year. This is not something that staff does. This is something that council does. So I just wanted to kind of make that introduction. It is available to the public now, but again, primarily this is for the city council because the tentative budget is what actually goes in front of the public. Perfect. Okay, so
Beverage and
Okay, go ahead.
this is kind of what I call, I'm not going to be in the spreadsheet of the budget much. When you have questions about the budget, you'll notice that there are I included line numbers. So if you ever call me and say, hey, Ben, what's line number 422? That way I can look at it and reference and we can have a discussion that way. More tonight is about the story of the admin budget. What is it that we're putting together here? And so I will be talking about some numbers, but primarily this is something that you guys should look at. Take some time in the next month to look at the budget and try and understand the numbers of it. Tonight, I'm just going to provide kind of a high level overview of what the budget represents. So the first thing that is this budget is the closeout of capital projects. So we have the Parkway and the water tank. Those are two projects that have kind of been ongoing and we hope to close out in this budget cycle. We also have an anticipated ramp up of building permits. So with the Parkway being wrapped up, Firelight will now be able to move forward with permitting homes. And we've kind of modeled the revenue of that, how they've projected pulling permits. So they've told us how they anticipate pulling permits in the next year. And I believe I took that at about 80%. So I used their number, but then cut it down just to be conservative. New programming, movies in the park. Doesn't even sound worth discussing, but the reason that I put this up is because I think it's important every year to talk about, are there any new programs that the council's adopting? As we understand with the federal government, it's easy to roll out a new program. It's more difficult to roll back programs. It's easier to implement programs than it is to cut programs. And so the only new programming that we're suggesting this year is for in the community events. We are doing a pilot program for movies in the park. So again, not really noteworthy, is not a significant budgetary item, but that's the only new programming that we're considering for this year. Quick overview of the budget. There are 420 line items in the budget. That's general ledger codes across all the funds. In budget requesting, so what I wanted to do, my goal with this was to have each department head that was relevant submit budget requests. And that's what we did. We did a budget request period with each department head. What kind of relevant department head? There were 5 people that contributed to the budget. And then I wanted a second set of eyes on every line item. And so I actually didn't contribute a single line item myself. I did modify some, but I was mostly reviewing the work of Darren did engineering, planning, zoning, code enforcement, admin. So this is Ruth. She really carried a lot of the budget line items. Ruth did a lot of work on this budget, so I commend her for her work on that. She did all the revenue across all the funds, and then all of the admin related expenses and wages and benefits. So she did 218, almost more than half of the budget Ruth took care of. So she did a great job. Public Works, JD had 76 lines. Bailey took 23, and then wages and budget is actually Ruth also. So I guess there were only 4 people contributed, and then my review made 5. Methodology, we took a very conservative approach to revenues. So when we built up revenues, we didn't build in large growth factors unless we were very confident in them. And then what I did was I took the budget requests and I had this budget where the expenditures exceeded the revenues, and that's obviously not allowed. We have to adopt a balanced budget. So then I shrunk the requests as I deemed appropriate, what things could be cut and what things were essential to continue. If there were revenues that we budgeted over conservatively, I increased until we got to a point where it was balanced, where revenues equal expenditures for all funds. And then also I referenced the strategic plan for anything that was a financial component of that. This primarily relates to Westfield Park. Most of the other strategic plan items were kind of a time capacity, not money. Okay, I wanted to review each of the funds just so that everybody understands what funds we have as a city. Every city has a general fund. This is the primary, this is where all unrestricted revenue comes in. This is where the primary business takes place. The bulk of everything happens in the general fund. We have a capital projects fund. This is where all impact fees go, as well as any set aside for future projects you would put in a capital projects fund. We have the Parkway Fund, which was a capital projects fund dedicated just for this Parkway project because of its size and special revenue sources. We have a water fund, which is a business-like fund, an enterprise fund. This is where, we have full depreciation, just like a business operates. You try to capture all of your actual expenses in the water fund. We just recently implemented a stormwater fund, so we do have budget line items for stormwater in this. And we have the cemetery fund. Cemetery fund is kind of interesting. It's a perpetual care permanent fund, which every time somebody buys a plot in the cemetery, a portion of it goes into this perpetual care fund. And the revenues, the interest from that money is supposed to help maintain the cemetery. It doesn't even come close. Produces a couple $1,000s a year in interest. Again, not even close to the general fund is supplementing the cemetery fund significantly. Okay, next up, I want to talk about fund balance. And this is primarily related to the general fund because that's what we're statutorily limited in how much money can be retained in the general fund. I want to talk a little bit about the history of the fund balance in the general fund and call out one item. It's very important to understand with every budget that a city council adopts, do you have a general fund contribution or appropriation? Meaning, are you spending your rainy day funds, which is essentially not a sustainable way to operate a city? Or are you contributing to your rainy day funds, or is it just net zero? In this case, it's a net zero. We did not budget to use or to appropriate any general fund balance dollars. I did want to talk about this. I think everybody on the council understands the history of the general fund balance. There were audit findings year over year. As I look back through the history of Toquerville's audits, it was always over, where the city was retaining too much money. And then in fiscal year 24, it actually dipped below the required or the ceiling. And so there was no longer a finding there. But then due to a current year general fund appropriation, we're now dropping to 19%. So we're kind of on this trajectory where it's like, okay, we have too much. And then I think I have a graph chart here. So we have too much. And then all of a sudden now it's dropping where it's too little, right? Where you're ideally, I think a city of this size should maintain between 30 to 35% of rainy day funds. When you go above that, if you have too much, you can always dump it off in a capital projects fund. You can keep as much money as you want in a capital projects fund, but then it's dedicated to capital projects. Rainy day funds, unrestricted funds in a general fund are simply just can be used for anything, but you can't keep more than 35% of your revenue in that. So here you can see we went from it peaked in 22 at 1.1 million. And now we're down to about 400,000. And everybody knows this. Toquerville City's in a growth phase. We're kind of anticipating, we're preparing for growth. And so it makes sense that, there's some growing pains. And I view this simply as kind of preparing for those growth pains, but it has to stabilize. So it can't dip anymore. is kind of my perspective from a budget perspective. So that's how we approached the budget this year, is just we can't dip any lower. I'm not comfortable dipping any lower. That said, the city, and I mentioned that if you go over in general fund balance, you can always dump it off into capital projects fund. The city really has, as far as back as I looked, hasn't carried a material amount of fund balance, of unrestricted fund balance in the capital projects fund. So that's something that the city could do if we again got to that point where we were exceeding 35%. All right, employees. This is also kind of one of those critical metrics that is important for a city council to understand. How many employees are we adding in this budget cycle? Because those similar to programming, once you add employees, it's difficult to pull back on employees. In this case, we budgeted in fiscal year 25 for 13 full-time equivalents. In fiscal year 26, we are budgeting for 11 and a half. So a reduction in 1.5 full-time equivalents. This constitutes no change. There's no reduction in force proposed as part of this budget. This is simply just not backfilling the positions. You guys are familiar with this, with our recorder transition, consolidating that position and removing one other position that was budgeted to go full-time back and keeping it as a part-time position. So 11 and a half is not a change from our current state. Our compensation policy, our current policy and our proposed policy that will be coming up shortly, accommodate 2 wage adjustments for staff. That is a cost of living adjustment and a merit adjustment. Cost of living adjustment is 2.5%. This simply follows the Social Security Index. It's usually the safest and pretty conservative way to approach COLA.
Jump in there. Is it 2.5? Last year was 3.
Yeah.
Something.
After COLA, after COVID,
Right.
2020, 21, and 22, it was really high. So but inflation has really come down. And so we're just matching the Social Security Index.
So it's back down.
It's down to that low, yeah. And then merit, so this is contingent on availability, and a not to exceed threshold was budgeted at 4%. So typically an organization you like to see between 3 and 5%. And this would be available, the way we're going to structure this would be, if adopted, would be on January 1st. And one of the reasons for that is if revenues aren't coming in where they need to come in, then you have the ability to pull that back across the entire staff. There will be more conversation about the compensation policy specifically in the second meeting in May. You're right, second meeting in May. Part of the public hearing for the tentative budget, there will be a public hearing on compensation. So we can dive deeper into that at that time. Building permits. A 4 multiple increase in building permits is not something I'd normally feel comfortable budgeting for, but we also have bigger development than the city's ever seen in the past. So again, I budgeted this at about 80% of the developer's anticipated pace for pulling building permits. And these are notes on the revenues. If you go through the budget line by line, I think those building permits are really kind of what would stand out to me as the most concerning. Why did we multiply 4 times on our anticipated revenue from building permits? I still think that it's a pretty conservative number, but we would also have room to ratchet that back mid-year if needed. Utility connection increases. So this is the sewer and solid waste line items. They increased simply because of an increase in anticipated connections. And again, I hate to say it doesn't matter, but it kind of doesn't matter because the budget, the revenues and expenditures always correlate. If you have more revenue, you have more expenses. If you have less revenue, you have less expenses. So it's primarily a pass-through.
I stop you there real quick.
Yep.
The amount of money we charge extra, the $1 or whatever for sewer and water, is that enough? If we still pay our payroll, is that covering that?
For those positions?
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. I just want to make sure if we
no primary change there. And as we get more connections, that even expands. I will say there is a appropriation. So I said there's no general fund appropriation, but there is a recreation, arts and parks appropriation for $150,000. And this is just basically what this is doing is it's pulling money out of the restricted recreation, arts and parks money, putting it into the capital projects fund in order to build Westfield Park. So that's the reason for that. There's a revenue and an expense going out to Fund 40. I did want to talk briefly about the ratio of property tax and sales tax. So our sales tax represents 16% of the general fund revenue. Property tax is 12%. Kind of a healthy operating, a typical city with a good balance of homes and commercial businesses. They'll be about a third each. So sales tax and property tax really pay for the majority of services that a municipality has. We don't have really any sales tax outlets. And so it makes sense that sales tax is less. Property tax is also low. It's because these other revenues just are higher weighted relative to sales and property tax. So what I would hope to see is over the next few years, this kind of balances out more, where sales and property tax come closer to that 33% mark, where you're paying for services with those items. I'm not going to spend too much time on property tax because we did this in strategic planning. This is just a straight copy paste from our strategic planning presentation. Just a reminder to anybody listening that property tax doesn't have an inflation component. So if you don't do truth in taxation, essentially your revenue goes down every year. That said, our property tax rate, if you look purely from a perspective of comparing to similar entities, similar cities in the state, we land right in the middle. There's cities that have a higher property tax rate than Toquerville, and there's cities that have a lower tax rate than Toquerville. I'm pretty comfortable with where that's at right now. And for that reason, as well as reasons we talked about in strategic planning, I'm not recommending truth in taxation this year. However, that is a directive of City Council. If that was something that you guys wanted to pursue, we could do that. Sales tax. Again, this is kind of my opportunity to talk about these revenue sources every year and make sure that the public and the council understand what our revenue sources are. When you pay, say, when we have a sales tax outlet and we go buy a candy bar at the local, truck stop, hypothetical truck stop. Thank you, travel center. I wanted to make sure everybody understood
1%.
what the city actually receives of that. So 4.85% of the 6.45% goes directly to the state. 0.25%, another small chunk goes to the county. And then there's this 1% that is a local sales tax. And I'll get into how that breaks down, but then there's two other components you guys know about: recreation, arts and parks, and then this transportation infrastructure. So this 1% is 50% of it goes directly to the city. So if you collect $10 in property tax, you immediately get $5 as a city. Sales tax, thank you. You immediately get $5. The other $5 goes out into a state pool, and they divide it based on your population. So they take 2,400, whatever the city's current population is, and divide it by the state population, and you get that percentage of the remainder.
And that's pretty much where the 16% we're getting now.
That's exactly right. Now that said, when you buy a car and you pay sales tax on it, and you go to the DMV, if you buy a used car, you're not buying it at a dealership, and you go to the DMV and you pay sales tax, the city does collect sales tax on that money. And so we do get some sales tax that's collected directly, but primarily the city's sales tax is from that population distribution. And so that 257%, we get 2.5 times what Toquerville residents actually pay in sales tax. Not Toquerville residents, but since we don't have a sales tax outlet, that's essentially what's happening. So this population distribution benefits the city right now, and that balance will kind of come into more level as more sales tax outlets come into the city. Any questions about how that sales tax distribution works?
Are you gonna talk about that red local line, that 1%?
That's what it was.
Okay,
That
'cause
1%.
So I know other cities, their sales tax is higher than it is in Tocqueville.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I think that's my next slide.
Oh, perfect.
Perfect. So here you'll see all the communities that have this same tax rate, 6.45%. If you look at it, they're communities similar to Tocqueville that have kind of lower, either they don't have a lot of sales tax outlets or they have none or very few. And then when you look at the cities that have, the communities that have 6.75%, which is the additional 0.3%, these are cities that have more sales tax outlets than the city this represents more of their general fund money. And then you have the resort communities that have implemented additional resort sales tax. But I wanted to talk briefly about that 0.3% of sales tax, because that money goes straight to those cities. So Hurricane collects an additional 0.3%, and that goes straight to the community. There's no population distribution. And so there is a revenue opportunity here that the city could consider. It's called the city option sales and use tax. I think it's actually the city highway option sales and use tax. If the city were to implement this after the opening of the travel center, it would produce roughly $50,000 a year. It's a pretty low barrier to adopt. If the city council said, yes, 100% move forward with it, within a few meetings, that could be in place. Did you have a question? Oh, okay, sorry. So what would be the reasons that the city council would consider adopting this new source? Because local residents would pay more sales tax on some things, but overall, because there's a new sales tax outlet coming in, that would be one reason that the council would consider adopting this sales tax. Because what you're doing is you're allocating the cost of providing municipal services to the people passing through. So in larger cities where you have, say, a lot of tourism and people coming in and staying in your city, they're placing a demand, say, on public services. And sales tax, TRT, these are the ways how you capture that cost of providing the service. It's through those sales taxes. And so what you're really trying to do is allocate the cost of maintaining the roads to the people who are just passing through. And it doesn't really make sense to consider this when you don't have major sales tax outlets, because basically that just means residents are paying more when you go buy a used car, for example. But it could make sense, if the council so chose, to implement this now that there's going to be a fairly significant chunk of money coming through the community. So this is just something to consider. I wanted to just introduce this idea in this meeting, gauge interest if we're at that level, or have additional conversations. So kind of.
So the city can do that. We can do that as a city. So, okay. And that's why.
It's really easy to do.
Right. And that's why you're saying Springdale and Virgin do it, because they have such a high
Well, they have
tourism. So that's why they have the higher sales tax, and that goes directly to them.
So if we go back, I'll go back to this community page.
So there, so Virgin and Springdale.
That's
Virgin and Springdale have a resort community tax.
Right.
In addition to this.
Oh, in addition to that. Okay.
City option, right?
That goes all to them?
And yes, it's either 1 or 1.6% that goes directly to those communities.
Okay.
What we're talking about here is what differentiates the 6.45% to the 6.7%.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
No, I get it. Okay. So it's kind of the same idea.
Same idea.
So the city can do it, but as opposed to like the fire district had to go to the state legislature to get it done.
This is a
That
tool.
didn't happen.
This is a tool already in our tool belt.
Right.
The legislature's already authorized it.
Okay.
And
So the legislature gives the city to do it, but they won't give
No.
special districts the ability.
No, because that's adding on top of what the cities can do. That's a whole different.
Okay.
And EMS and all that stuff. And
Okay.
I don't want to talk about that right now.
Okay.
too soon.
Okay.
So a lot of our residents have been using the internet rather than driving into St. George. And so as a result of that, they would be affected by that.
They would be paying more, correct? Yep. Yeah, if you order something, assuming that the entity collecting sales tax is collecting correctly. Anybody that's worked in e-commerce knows the challenges associated with appropriately collecting the right sales tax rate and remitting it. There's so much room for error in that.
Yeah.
But yes, theoretically, if everything's working correctly, you're right.
But you gotta look at it, if Sapp Brothers Travel Center was to sell 1 million gallons of fuel in a month, the amount of money that we would generate off of that would be huge compared to what it costs Tokenville citizens.
So it's just another, it's a kind of a new opportunity that could be implemented pretty easily before that travel center opened, if desired. Another one, this is an interesting one. I'm not sure if, at least since I've been here, we haven't talked about the TUF, which is a transportation utility fee. This is basically how this works. A number of communities throughout the state have adopted this. There was kind of a period where it was under litigation, and so communities kind of paused this consideration. Basically, this is a fee that's assessed on like a ERU basis that comes with a utility bill. So say it's typically like between $10 and $20 a month, kind of depending where the study lands. And this, again, is borne by the residents. Obviously, any person that's paying utilities would be impacted by this. But it's another revenue source that cities are using to pay for infrastructure cost. So there's an advantage that it goes out with utility bills as opposed to like a tax, which is like a property tax that's paid once a year. How this works is a city, basically, they conduct a study for how the ERU is assessed and then how much your infrastructure costs to maintain. And this could be implemented. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this. Anybody who followed the legislative session or got ULCT emails can see that the legislature is considering ways to how do they fence this in? How do they keep control of it? Because the Supreme Court basically said, yes, cities can do this. And now the legislature is saying, okay, yes, you can do it, but like, let's put restrictions on it. The most controversial topic being whether religious organizations would be required to pay it. ULCT's stance was that they should be required to pay it. That's kind of how it got hung up and why it didn't move forward. It died in the legislative process, but I anticipate there will be more legislation related to these transportation utility fees in the future.
And it would be assessed to both commercial and residential?
Correct, yeah. So say a house is like 1 ERU and maybe a travel center would be 100 ERUs, something like that.
And is there any restrictions on what type of infrastructure?
It's all roads and sidewalks. So it's
strictly roads.
Strictly roads and sidewalks. It would create a new fund, similar to like we just created a stormwater fund. You'd create something where only street maintenance came out of that money just to keep it clean. Couple more notes on that. Again, I already said this, the Supreme Court affirmed a city's authority to impose this. That's why prior to this Supreme Court decision, there were like 10 cities in Utah that had done this. And now I think there's kind of been a domino effect where a lot of other cities are doing it. Locally, there's a number of cities considering it. In Washington County, I'm not sure of any that actually have adopted it, but there are some that are considering it. Few that have completed studies already to determine how much it would be. Again, typically $10 to $20 a month dedicated for maintenance of city streets. So that would just be another revenue opportunity that the city could consider to maintain the streets. Wanted to talk briefly about material changes and expenditures. We have been in discussion with our contractor, our radio station. He's essentially the engineer of what it could look like for a local nonprofit agency to assume the radio license and still accomplish the same mission that the city set out to do. So we did not include the maintenance fee for that radio station in next year's budget because it's looking like that was well received and could move forward with a nonprofit operating that radio station. There's some wage reallocation. So if you get really into the numbers of the budget, you'll see that some stuff like the administrative budget is less than the prior year, but the engineering, planning, and zoning budget is more. That's just primarily because we reallocated how things were allocated between each department. again, if you have any specific questions, feel free to call me, come in. We can schedule time to talk about it. But another material change is we have an election this year. So we have that interlocal agreement with the county where we'll be paying them for elections. It's another item. In the water fund, you may find that last year there was like, I don't know, $40,000 or $50,000 budgeted to other. Generally, we like to allocate those. Nobody really knows why that happened, but essentially those were allocated out between the various categories like fuel and maintenance, as it should have been in last year's budget. So you'll see that other is less, and then like fuel is a little bit more. Just kind of a technical change. Capital projects, we're undertaking very few capital projects this year just to kind of wrap everything up and try and get our feet under ourselves. So the Parkway is the big one, as well as Westfield Park. So those two items were budgeted for. Westfield Park, we did budget for a grant allocation. That grant period, there was one specific grant that we applied for, waiting to hear back on that. If that's not approved, then we'll have to make some changes. So in how we budget for that. So the $450,000 expense is contingent on that grant being received. And we'll know before the tentative budget if that was awarded or not. Okay, next steps. So the admin budget is balanced. So any additional inputs, whether that's increasing expenses or decreasing expenses, would have to be offset by an increasing or decreasing revenue. So again, we have a budget balanced right now. If there's changes from the council, let's just talk about how we would balance that. And that's all that needs to happen. And then ideally, we'd have feedback on the admin budget if there's any changes requested by April 9th. That gives you time to just kind of review it, make sure that there's any inclusions, or if there's any concerns of things you want to eliminate, we can do that. And then that gives us time to get the tentative budget together.
One question I have is, and I didn't find it in there, but is there like a section that you just have all the funds and the total for all the funds?
I didn't do that, but I certainly could.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
just very high level.
Like the end result totals.
Yep, we can do that.
Cool.
And then this is just a basic summary. The admin budget plus any council adjustments equals the tentative budget, and that will be put in front of the council for, we adopt a tentative budget. So we don't formally adopt the admin budget. This is just kind of an informal part of the process. But then we formally adopt the tentative budget on April 16th. That then goes through a number of changes before a final budget's adopted. I believe that's it.
So if we had specific line item questions, you would rather us do that with you specifically rather than in a meeting?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then the summary of changes, obviously this requires council consensus. So what I would do is track any changes that happen between the admin budget and the council budget and just send that all in one document so everybody can say, yes, I agree with that, or why did we do that? Why did we make that change?
Okay. And then you said 420 budget items. So just so I can understand.
Line item over here.
Right, but there's like 600 and something.
600 rows, that's because there's spacing and headers and that sort of thing.
Okay, so there's like 604, but 420 actual.
Actual
Is that what it is?
line
Okay.
items. Yep.
All right, I got you. That's what I was getting.
Total rows.
Okay, all right. Thank you, no, that's great.
All right.
Who did the accounting on figuring out how many rolls?
I don't. I counted each one actually. 1, 2, 3.
All right, any questions for Ben?
So Ben, the font on this was probably about 8-point font, and it was 15 pages.
I'm happy to submit a larger
It,
font
like, took
version.
me- And I'm like, okay, we got a city manager who's got really tiny print and 15 pages worth. I've got to find something in here wrong.
Okay.
I just zoomed in
And-
to 200%.
Oh, yeah.
Zoom it on the computer, not print it.
Yeah, well, I printed it out because I needed my ruler to read across. So anyway, the only thing that really, that I questioned, and you covered it, was the $400,000 of anticipated building permit money. And I about croaked when I saw that, but if you're using numbers that were provided to you and you're taking it at 80%, that means they plan on $500,000. We need that money if
it isn't coming through as we're trending through the year or whatever, and we'll have to make some adjustments then. But I'm happy to hear you say that the rainy day fund isn't part of this, it's balanced. And I have to tell you, in years past, when the rainy day fund was being used, it wasn't, the city council wasn't advised.
Right.
Okay? We were unaware, we were spending money like crazy thinking that it was in the budget, and that rainy day fund is supposed to be for capital expenditures, and it really went to the general fund. And the city council was blindsided. And you see the graph, and we just were unaware of the fact that that fund was funding the expenses for the general fund. So will you make sure that if we need that rainy day fund, because we're down to 19%, bring it to the council and let us realize that we need to tighten our belt and not spend the money when it's really not there. It's coming from the rainy day fund.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd say I'm very sensitive to both those issues that you brought up. I would first speak to the $400,000 in permitting. That's something that I'm going to be watching every single month. Because I'm nervous about that too, even though I felt like we were conservative in that number, kind of conservative, very sensitive to that. I'm going to be watching it month over month and probably giving reports on it as to where we're at with it.
Right.
And definitely with the appropriation of general fund, those rainy day funds. Yeah, sensitive to that as well.
And I didn't find anything bad. I went through, I spent hours on this thing, and, I was really happy with the job that you've done on this and how detailed it is. And, every time there was something that stuck out, there was a reason for it. So, for instance, the administrative payroll, why it was lower and where it was because of the allocation. So hats off to you as far as I'm concerned. Really appreciate the work and the time that you put into this. And I don't think I'm going to have any recommendations in the future on changing this thing unless something new comes up. So thank you for.
Yeah, thanks for reviewing it. It's a lot of work to look at somebody else's spreadsheet. So
As we're reviewing this for the upcoming meetings, just for my own clarification, so I know that you've got things divided up between the different parks and et cetera, et cetera. So when I look and I see like vehicle leases in each specific area, would I add those numbers up from the specific areas to see the total of how much we're spending on vehicle leases?
yeah, exactly. Like
Okay.
there could be a truck that we're dividing out between
Right.
cemetery and parks, and we're just allocating that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good point. We try and capture the cost of each department as accurately as possible, and that often means chopping it up. It's not to make it more confusing. It's just to try and say, okay, this is how much the cemetery costs to operate.
Okay.
Well, that's the problem we've had in the past, that everything got put underwater. Everything was underwater, and everything came, and we never knew what our water needed to be. For water
Yeah,
rates.
And so there isn't one overall,
right.
so I would have to add a.
You'd have to add them up. Yeah.
I was on my calculator. Adding up the
Your
wages.
9 key?
Yeah, my calculator.
Oh, you
Trying to add what the wages were going to be, total administrative wages. And, I had to do it like Todd was advised. You have to look at every single.
And I fully acknowledge it's difficult to kind of back into those numbers. If you want to say what the total city payroll is, it's easy to miss something. If you guys ever have questions about, hey, how does this all roll up? We have supporting spreadsheets that show all the wages and how they're allocated across departments. So there could be times when you're like, hey, let me just see the wage worksheet. And
Right.
that could hopefully,
Right. Well, I had to
Simplify
do
it.
it the hard way.
the hard way. Yeah,
And you're right, it's about half the budget.
it's a lot.
So, okay. Thanks again.
Where are we now?
We are,
I do like that format too. It's like much easier to read rather than, like without the lines in it. I think that's probably the only difference, but it's much easier to go through and pick it apart. And
okay, any more discussion on our administrative budget?
I'm excited about the Westwood Park budget.
Oh, yeah. Now, Ben he said he put an application for grant. So,
I'm holding my breath. I didn't want to speak to it too much.
right.
holding my breath on it. I think we have a strong case for that grant, but it's competitive. So
So hopefully we get that. All right, we're gonna move into our calendar events, Easter egg hunt, Saturday, April 12th, Century Park, 10 a.m. Arbor Day, plant a tree pickup. I guess we're planting a tree and pick up some mess at the park. I'm not sure what that one is exactly. Center Street Park at noon on Arbor Day. All right, anybody else have any calendar event items they need to bring?
Could I ask why we're doing it the week before Easter?
I just asked that and I'm not sure. I don't know why we're.
if memory serves me correctly, it's because there's a conflict with the county fair.
Well, I just looked at the county fair and it's that weekend, 11th and 12th.
I think it crosses, it's like a week and a half. And so there's less activity on that first weekend. The closing weekend is kind of more activity. And the royalty participates in that second weekend. I think that was primarily the reason
Yeah,
for it.
April 10th through the 19th.
Yeah.
So that's a long fair. Okay. That makes sense to a point, but yes. All right, any other questions?
Are we doing anything for the fair?
We don't normally.
No, just a royal.
Just a royalty, yeah.
The royalty.
Years ago, we had a seed display, but we've lost interest. People just haven't wanted to build the seed display, so we haven't really done that. If someone would like to build a seed display, that'd be great. You know, they're pretty neat, but they're definitely time consuming. All right, we do need to move into a closed session, but I need a motion.
Mayor, make a motion to move into a closed session to discuss litigation, security, property acquisition or sell. And that's it. We don't need character?
No.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are going to take a 3-minute break.